Doey's past is hiding something huge and he's not what he seems. In Chapter 4 Poppy Playtime, we were introduced to many new characters and got filled in on a lot of lore gaps. More coming on that soon, but we learn more about Doey specifically. Today I'll be explaining who Doey is, his relation to the other experiments, and his unsettling backstory. So get ready because you're all in for a ride. As always, I'm Jeeps, and here we go. Now just a reminder, if you haven't seen Chapter 4, do note there will be a lot of spoilers here, so go at your own pace. Starting off, who's Doey? Doey, also known as Experiment 1322, is what his name suggests. A living creature made out of some type of clay mixture, presumably once human like most of the experiments of his kind. He is an ally that we meet in Chapter 4 of Poppy Playtime, the first time being the gameplay trailer, where he appears from the ceiling before telling us to follow him to safety, indicating that he was going to be an ally, and we were right. Throughout the beginning of the chapter, the game presents Doey as a joyous, comedic, and kind character who wants to assist our way through the prison, bringing us to safety from the prototype, Yarnaby, and the doctor, and he does just that. He gets past Yarnaby and even saves us from Pianosaurus just as we were about to be killed. And by saving, I mean bashing Pianosaurus around the walls until he was basically turned into pieces. And if you take a free cam look into the darkness, you'll end up seeing 4 arms holding on to Pianosaurus as he is being thrown, showing Doey's hostile form, which is extremely different from his passive nature. Now, we don't primarily see this form until the very end of the chapter, but listening to Doey throughout Chapter 4, you could tell that something is seemingly off. At times, Doey will have a playful attitude, while in other moments, Doey might speak very low and seriously. We first get to experience this after Doey saves us. He helps us over large gaps before asking about Poppy, not sounding angry, but you can hear the change of tone.
So, have you seen Poppy anywhere?
And later on in the chapter, when he sees Poppy and Kissy, for a brief moment he sounds shocked and almost asks if that's really Poppy, and almost lashes out at her after being told that the prototype followed them down there. Another example of Doey's strange personality and tones. Later on, we find out that Poppy left Safe Haven without a notice towards anybody, leaving them to believe she was gone for good. So with Poppy randomly showing up after abandoning everyone for some time, it's understandable why most of the experiments, even Doey, would be serious and cautious. Doey even speaks in one of the VHS tapes we find speaking about Poppy, how she left, and how he was scared and uncertain, but needs to remain strong as others look up to him as a leader. And this leadership can also be seen from a tape where Hoppy Hopscotch is talking to Doey, saying they lost their supplies.
They took everything we had, right after one of them picked my leg!
How is he, Doc?
Not too bad. He'll live.
See?
He'd bite clean. Could get infected otherwise.
So, what do we do now?
For starters, you two stay here tonight. Let things settle down outside. I'll find more food for you to bring up to play care when you're ready.
Thanks, Doey.
Taking a look at Doey, it's clear that out of all of the experiments so far, he has the most unique abilities, anatomy, and personality. His character is filled with depth, but in order to understand him, we'll need to look deeper into his backstory. At the beginning of Chapter 4, like every chapter so far, we open up with a VHS tape. The VHS tape starts with an ad for Doey, then showing a child named Jack opening a present on Christmas Day of 1992. The gift being a Doey figure made by Playtime Co., alongside a certificates to join a group touring the factory on January 22nd, 1993, which we find out from the VHS footage date on the bottom right corner of the tape. The VHS then shows Jack looking over a railing into a mixing pot while his parents tell him to back away, but then the railing breaks and Jack falls into the machine. Everyone starts screaming and the camera drops as the tour guide yells for them to turn off the camera, prioritizing Playtime Co.'s strict policies over recording and footage over the life of the child in the moment. which is honestly kind of questionable, but you know, we're talking about Playtime Co. here. Now this is where everything starts to turn really dark for Doey's backstory, as we find out that Doey wasn't just any ordinary experiment, but a child of a loving family who was unfortunately the victim of a life-threatening accident that turned him into Doey. We know this as there are a total of 17 tapes in Chapter 4 Poppy Playtime, and the 14th tape covers Jack's parents coming to visit the factory after the incident. His parents finally see Jack again, but now in a clay-formed abomination that we see Doey as in chapter 4. They ask to speak with him, which the scientists allow, but Doey doesn't recognize them, and everything goes wrong when Doey suddenly outbursts, mistaking his parents for the scientists, torturing and experimenting on them, then killing them without a second thought. Now this sudden rage could be for a multitude of reasons, as most experiments have difficulty remembering who they are after their transformation, and experience side effects like memory loss and confusion. I believe that this is the case here, but here's what makes it interesting. You see, Jack was not the only child used for experiment 1322, but rather he was one of 3. You see, in chapter 3 of Poppy Playtime, we find a tape in one of the many rooms named 1322 Report Void. Now at the time, we were questioning which experiment this could be, specifically whether it was Dog Day or someone else at the time, but once the orientation handbook was released earlier last year, this was quickly dismissed due to Bobby Bearhug being revealed as experiment 1186, revealing that the smiling critter experiments were within that range, alongside Catnap being experiment 1188, not in the higher numbers like 1322. Fast forward to now, and we've received information that experiment 1322 is actually Doey. So looking back at this tape named 1322 Report Void, we can finally find out who the second patient was. The tape shows a scientist speaking about Kevin. Kevin was an orphan within Home Sweet Home, taken as a patient for experiment 1322. His friend Joseph then comes in along past curfew, asking where he is, only for the scientist to reply that he's very sick with some additional conversation. Then fast forward to 2025 with the release of the new chapter, and we actually get another tape that refers to Kevin Barnes, the same person from the previous tape. I believe that this tape is a direct continuation of the previous tape, as the scientist starts off stating he faced an interruption, explaining why the previous tape in chapter 3 is a voided report. The new tape we find explains that experiment 1322 was successfully extracted, and that he was known to have bizarre, aggressive behavior to those around him, especially his friends, also excelling in a variety of tests at the game station that the orphans had to participate in, like physical tests, reaction time, reflexes, and mental fortitude. The scientist then states his worry about the project and how it could endanger the entire project, as 1322B, Kevin Barnes can turn on those he trusts when enraged due to being overwhelmed by a stray feeling. His words, not mine. He then finishes off the tape stating Sawyer's word is law, and that 1322A and C will be gathered for processing the next morning. Now don't get me wrong, in the past we've had a load of information packed into these tapes, but this gives us a shockwave of information. Not only does it show the concern from the other scientists running the project, but how Doey was not one, but 3 separate children in one experiment. We know that Kevin Barnes is experiment 1322B, being the second experiment, as A and C were the only ones mentioned, and I have a feeling that Jack Ayers, the child who fell in the machine, is experiment 1322A, as he was the first to suffer the incident with the vat at the start of the chapter, beginning the project. This leaves experiment 1322C, which is Matthew Hallard, which we discover from a counselor report found within the game. Essentially, we have 3 patients/hosts, all part of the same experiment, experiment 1322A, B, and C, and I've disclosed who is who. This is extremely important, as if all of these hosts are combined into one experiment we know as Doey, then it explains Doey's sudden mood swings in chapter 4. In the Matthew Hallard counselor report I just mentioned, we discover that Matthew was thoughtful, kind, considerate, and understanding, though not extremely intelligent. This is the main personality that we see in the game as Doey, which is very considerate of the people he protects, especially us, in an understanding manner. However, remember when I mentioned Doey's change of tone? Every time Doey experiences an overwhelming event or scenario, he tends to lose control or become very agitated. For example, Poppy saying the prototype was near, Doey talking about who Harley Sawyer was, and much more. This attitude is very similar to the instincts of Kevin Barnes, who tends to be the most hostile out of the 3 patients. As the scientist said, Kevin can turn on the people he trusts the most, due to an overwhelming amount of emotion in the moment, which is exactly what we see at the end of chapter 5 when Safe Haven gets destroyed along with the people Doey knew, the people he considered his family. And this is where we see Doey turn into his hostile form, showing 6 arms and 3 separate humans trying to crawl out of his mouth, referring to the 3 separate hosts. He tries to come after us and, as we know, gets killed, saying I'm sorry in his final moments. When I was making this video, one of my family members brought up to me that he could have multiple personality disorder, a severe mental health condition characterized by the presence of 2 or more distinct personality states or identities. It's not that I had this naturally, but rather 3 separate personalities were fighting against each other in one singular body. So Doey isn't what he seems. This is the cause of the mood swings and shows us just how sad his backstory was, and the dark secrets he had hidden behind his back. Doey wasn't evil, but it's clear that he was very unfortunate in his situation. Let me know what you want me to cover in future videos. I'll be working on covering all of my thoughts regarding the new info we have for Poppy Playtime. As always, I'm Jeeps, and I'll see you next time.